Me and UCI History Project, and welcome you to our annual Distinguished Lecture during Teacher Appreciation Week, an inspiring talk for educators featuring Tyrone Howard, UCLA Pritzker Family Endowed Chair and Professor. During this week in particular, it is my honor to thank teachers and administrators from districts throughout California, including the Orange County Department of Education Teachers of the Year, UCI alumni and education students, as well as the amazing folks who support student learning in and out of schools joining us today. I know that this week is a special one for educators. As a mom, I get to help my kids share their gratitude for their wonderful teachers, librarian, and support staff with cards, flowers, and treats. And these offerings represent the immense gratitude that we have for the teachers in our life. And in my professional role, I also have the great honor to recognize the essential work that educators engage in every day to create and nurture caring spaces for learning and inquiry for students. I want to recognize that this year has included many, many challenges that educators and students have struggled through. And despite this difficult time, I've found that an important space for healing, hopefulness, and re-energizing is in community with educators as we come together to learn with and from one another. One of the central goals of the UCI Teacher Academy is to create a space that fosters collaboration among classroom teachers, teacher leaders, and administrators to develop and enhance their professional practice and inspire and lead others in transforming instruction. We see you practitioners as the agents of change for improving educational opportunities for youth. And today, I thank you for sharing in our space of celebration and learning, and appreciate you taking your time to participate in this opportunity that's made possible by generous donation from Schools First Credit Union. Our agenda today includes a presentation by Dr. Tyrone Howard and opportunities for audience question and answers after his presentation. Then we will announce the 2022 Anteaters in Education Outstanding Alumni Teacher, and each of you is entered in our raffle, and I'll conclude by announcing the winners of Dr. Howard's book, All Students Must Thrive, Transforming Schools to Combat Toxic Stressors and Cultivate Critical Wellness. I'd also like to acknowledge that the University of California, Irvine is located on the land of the Hashim and Tongva peoples, who have continuously occupied the area for the last 8,000 years. The Ahashiman and Tongva nations continue to claim their place in their traditional territory. To learn more about the Indigenous people and the place where you live and work, I invite you to visit nativeland.ca, where you can find more information about the Indigenous peoples. And now I would like to share a welcome message from the Dean and Professor of the UCI School of Education, Frances Contreras. Dean Contreras has come to UCI this year from UC San Diego, where she served as Associate Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, as well as Professor of Educational Studies. I am so pleased to have her here leading us at UCI, where she sees the opportunities to support, engage, and respond to the needs of teachers in California as a critical investment for the UCI School of Education.
Hello, my name is Frances Contreras, Dean and Professor of the UCI School of Education. Welcome to an inspiring talk for educators featuring today's guest speaker, Dr. Tyrone Howard, Pritzker Family Endowed Chair and Professor in the School of Education at UCLA. We are celebrating our 5th year hosting this event during Teacher Appreciation Week. Each year, we hope to honor and inspire our local educators, alumni, student teachers, and community partners with a program that helps our education community further reimagine teaching and learning to create more equitable and just education systems. We also want to celebrate you and your contributions to moving the needle in this mission. Today, we have joining with us many past and current Orange County Department Teacher of the Year nominees and past winners, UCI education alumni, students from the School of Education, and many local educators from districts we work and partner with. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you to our event sponsors. Today's event is brought to you by the UCI School of Education's Teacher Academy. This program, founded in 2018, thanks to a generous gift from Schools First Federal Credit Union, provides a home for teachers and school leaders to develop and enhance their professional practice by offering programs in teacher preparation, professional development, teacher leadership, and administrator leadership. If this is your first time participating in one of our Teacher Academy events or workshops, we encourage you to visit the UCI Teacher Academy website and learn more about our monthly workshops and series that serve thousands of Southern California teachers annually with programming in early literacy, writing, mathematics, science, history, and education technology. We also feature special topics of interest to schools and districts we serve, such as trauma-informed instruction, best practices for remote instruction, and social and emotional learning. We also want to invite you to stay connected with the UCI School of Education as we embark on an exciting time. This fall, we will be celebrating our 10th year as an official school in the UCI campus and are proud to have recently been ranked the number 10 graduate school of education by US News and World Report and number 4 among public schools of education. This 10 in 10 celebration will be taking place over the next year through several events and opportunities to connect with the school. We welcome all of you to be part of this landmark milestone in our school's history. I want to close my remarks today by saying a special thank you on behalf of the School of Education, faculty, students, staff, and community for your invaluable contribution to the field. This past year has been for many the most difficult year in teaching and administration for many in their careers and in your work. And your dedication to our youth and innovative solutions to our field's most pressing challenges of this time has not gone unnoticed. As the UCI School of Education continues to grow and evolve, providing world-class research, professional development opportunities, strategic partnerships, and preparing qualified educators to enter the field, that we plan to work together to shape a future that is bright and equitable for every student in our community. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for being a valued member of our educator community.
Okay, and I am pleased to introduce my colleague and partner in the work of the UCI Teacher Academy, our co-founder and faculty advisor, Professor of Education, Dr. Beth Van Ness.
Thank you, Nicole. So today we are honored to present our guest lecturer, Dr. Tyrone Howard, the Pritzker Family Endowed Chair and Professor in the School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA. Professor Howard is well known for his research that examines equity, culture, race, teaching and learning, and is considered one of the most premier experts on these issues in the country. Dr. Howard is the faculty director of the UCLA Center for the Transformation of Schools. He also serves as the director of the UCLA Pritzker Center for Strengthening Children and Families and the director and founder of the UCLA Black Male Institute. Professor Howard has published over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, technical reports, and many books, 2 of which inform his talk today. All students must thrive and no more teaching without positive relationships. Dr. Howard was named the recipient of the 2015 UCLA Distinguished Teaching Award, the university's highest and most distinguished award for teaching excellence. During the last 5 years, Dr. Howard has been listed by Education Week as one of the 200 most influential scholars in the nation, informing educational policy, practice, and reform. And Dr. Howard is a member of the National Academy of Education and is the president-elect of the American Educational Research Association. But that's all about his wonderful academic contributions. I think what makes Dr. Howard special, he's a native to California. He's from Compton, where he also served as a classroom teacher. He started his higher education trajectory here in Southern California, earning his Bachelor of Arts at UC Irvine, Zot, and his MED at Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. For me, Dr. Howard embodies what is at the core of the UCI Teacher Academy, engaging with practice to shape research and simultaneously shaping practice through research. These dual commitments make Dr. Howard stand out as an exceptional researcher, educator, and teacher. He is deeply and firmly committed to improving the day-to-day lives and opportunities of youth, particularly and most importantly, for those students who continue to be underserved by our educational systems. So I will now turn it over to you, Dr. Howard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. I have to pinch myself sometime when I hear that introduction or any introduction of myself, because I oftentimes say that I by many accounts should not be here doing what I do. And I am fortunate enough to say that I'm able to do it because of the people who invested in me, the people who poured into me, the people who saw something in me that at times I did not see in myself. And I have to say that many of those individuals were teachers. And that's why I'm so honored to be here with you today, to really engage in some serious concerns that I have and some of the research that I'm beginning to do around how we can best support teachers in this moment. And so I want to say it's always just my sincere honor and privilege to be with folks who are a part of this wonderful community called the teaching community. And it's also special for me to do it with the folks at UCI School of Education, because as Beth said, I hold deep sentimental value for that wonderful campus. It did so much for my professional and personal growth. I'm always honored. Whenever they call, I answer and I'm there. I'm so amazed and just impressed with how much you all have grown that school in such a short period of time. It's just testimony to a number of folks like yourself. So thank you for this opportunity to be in your presence today. I always say I have so much to say, but never enough time to say it in. So I'm gonna just kind of jump into it because I wanna really kind of share with you some of my concerns that we're seeing around the field of education and specifically with teachers. And I wanna frame this conversation around supporting teachers. And when we support teachers, we support learning. And so much of what Dean Contreras shared, I think, is spot on, and given the fact that we are still in the midst of really unprecedented territory of what we have seen and what we are seeing in our field. And I think it's important for us to name and begin to unpack and begin to do some additional types of research and study the research that we're seeing now on our teaching community, because some of this data is deeply disturbing, and I'll share that with you momentarily. And I can probably say that most of this data will not be surprising to many of you, but I think it's good to see it in a much larger context, because it will definitely affirm what many folks already feel. It will probably affirm what folks already know, but I want to have us think about how we forge a path forward as we think about this crucial moment. So let me dive in, and please feel free to drop questions in the chat or in Q&A, because I want to make this interactive on the back end, because like I said, I always have so much I want to share, but never enough time. Let me start off with a big thank you for all of our teachers out there. And I want to thank the UCI, the UCI Teacher Academy, sorry about that, for its work with teachers. I know this is Teacher Appreciation Week. I tweeted out today that I am all for, and I'm a big advocate and big fan of teacher education, Teacher Appreciation Week, but I think teachers deserve more than a week if you're just being honest about it. I think that teacher appreciation should be something that we do 365 days out of the year, because for those of you who know this, who do this, when you are in this work, it's nonstop, it's unending, it can be all consuming. So I just want to say thank you to all the educators out there, no matter what role you play. You matter, you're important, your investment, your time, your commitment, your vision, your tireless investment in other people's children is not without recognition. And so let's make a move to make teacher appreciation something that we embody every single day. No disrespect to those who make Teacher Appreciation Day or Teacher Appreciation Week what it is, but I think we have to have a paradigm shift to begin to think about and talk about what teachers do every day, all day, around the clock. So thank you all for the investment. I am here because of teachers, formal teachers, informal teachers, and in so many ways, the lives of all of us has been profoundly shaped by teachers and what they do. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to sort of frame this recognition of teachers within a deep concern that I have for this current moment with teachers. And obviously what has framed this current moment for teachers has really been the effects of what we continue to see with COVID-19. I don't need to go into the particulars of what we are still witnessing, what we're still experiencing. And as folks have talked about this post-COVID moment, I've had to kind of slow folks down and say, I didn't think we were post-COVID, because we still see here in the state of California, rates are climbing in some counties. And so while we are better equipped to still deal with COVID, the effects of it are still with us. And now sort of 2 years plus in, we are learning more and more with each passing day about what we are still going through. And so obviously one of the things that we have heard a lot about, as you all know, has been sort of the academic slide or the learning loss that has been so well documented and so well discussed. And now we're seeing more and more data that unpacks what that learning slide or learning loss or academic slide has looked like. And I'm not going to bore you with the details of that, but there's more data looking at the levels in which we see Students fell behind in areas such as math and reading, which is no one's surprise that we see the gaps between racial and ethnic groups, which has made those gaps even wider. The divides between suburban and urban and rural, which again, should not be surprising. And so we're seeing more data that's showing the particularities of where the slide has occurred or is occurring, which makes the work even more challenging. Let's be clear, the work of teachers was already challenging before the pandemic. And as you all know, those gaps and the challenge before us has gotten even more daunting. And to compound that, there's been even more research, again, looking at the social emotional fallout of our young people. There was a report that came out last year from the US Surgeon General that talked about the increasing numbers of young people who are suffering from different levels of depression, anxiety, stress, and violence, much of it tied to what we are still going through with COVID-19. I have posed this question that I think it's time for us to get real, or why won't we get real about the effects of mental health? Why don't we discuss mental health? I think mental health has been such a taboo topic in our society that in many ways our silence around the issue makes us complicit in the maintenance of why we don't talk about it. Our refusal to talk about and be real about and to put issues around mental health on the table will make us part of the problem. And so it's important for us to pull back the covers on this taboo topic and to understand that there are lots of young people who are really struggling with this moment. And those struggles for young people have important and profound implications for their teachers. And so as we think about this, I want us to be mindful of the fact that the depth of despair, depression, anxiety, loss is perhaps greater than we have even imagined. I raise that because there was a powerful article in the Atlantic just last year by Joe Pinsker, who talks about the staggering number of kids who lost a parent to COVID-19. I really strongly recommend that you take a look at this article, because in it, what Pinsker unpacks is the fact that in a typical year, you have about 1.5 million young people who lose a parent or caregiver. And that over the course of the 2 years of COVID, that number was about 7.5 million young people who lost a parent or caregiver. That's a staggering number, 7.5 million young people who have lost at least one parent or caregiver. And for us to think that we can, quote unquote, return back to normal, I think would be a huge misstep and mistake if we don't recognize what this loss has meant for a lot of our students. And so this is part and parcel of the reason why we are seeing young people who are still finding it difficult to engage in learning, still finding it difficult to really think about sort of the ways that they're going to participate in schools. The number of young people who we still have not been able to find who have not re-enrolled in schools during the pandemic. And there's a whole body of research around the young people who are still finding, who are still struggling to find their ways, given the fact that they have lost so much over the past 2 years. And as I've shared in some of the previous research, there was a powerful report that came out by the Center for Disease Control that has talked about not just anxiety and depression and acts of violence, but also increasing rates of youth suicide. And I've shared this before, and I continue to share it because I think these data are deeply, deeply troubling and speaks to the depths of what we are seeing our young people go through. But this report by the Center for Disease Control talks about the fact that there have been 4 groups that have had significant increases in death by suicide over the past 2 years. The first group have been boys ages 10 to 24. I think this speaks to a larger conversation we must have in our country about how we are socializing boys in the midst of toxic masculinity, the effects of patriarchy. I think we do a number when we don't give boys the permission to feel, as Mark Brackett has talked about. I think there is growing research that when we don't give boys outlets, when we don't allow boys to be human, this contributes to the rates of what we see, death by suicide. The second group of young people are LGBTQ plus youth, and there's been much that has been written about this topic. If you look at the work by Ed Brockenbrough, J.B. Mayo, Ronnie Sandlow, they've documented the experiences that our LGBTQ plus youth have had in schools prior to the pandemic. But I think now we're seeing data that shows that during the pandemic, especially during the time of school closures, they were incredibly difficult and challenging for some of our LGBTQ plus youth. And then our last 2 groups are our Black and Latinx students. And I think that is part and parcel because of the fact that in many communities of color, issues around mental health are not talked about to the degree that they should be. There are cultural taboos that exist that contribute to this, but there's this ongoing reluctance, refusal, denial, resistance to engage in real, honest conversations about mental health in Black and brown communities. So I share that as a backdrop for what we see large numbers of our students who are contending with. And these young people show up in schools and have showed up in schools every single day with deep-seated trauma, deep-seated emotional harm, deep-seated pain. And I think the question we must ask is, but how are the teachers doing? Because teachers are especially those teachers who are really invested in this work, have already and always have committed themselves into the total development of young people, the holistic development of young people. But I think we have to ask that question now in light of so much being placed on teachers. We are continuing to hear reports anecdotally and through data, which I'll share with you in a moment, that teachers are reporting that they're seeing more challenges with students that they have ever seen before. I was in a school just 2 weeks ago talking to a teacher, and she said she'd been teaching for 35 years, and she had never seen the levels of emotional need that her students were showing in her entire 3.5 decades of teaching. And I think we need to ask this question over and over again. We need to really sort of institutionalize this question, but how are the teachers doing? Because as you all know, if teachers aren't doing well, then that means it's going to be difficult for the students to do well. And I think we have to begin to radically rethink and reimagine what we ask teachers to do. I'll say that again. I think we need to really radically rethink and reimagine what we ask teachers to do. Because much of what we're seeing now is that the typical demands that we have placed on teachers have become so normalized that we are running the risk of pushing more and more really competent, highly effective teachers out of this profession. And that's the premise of what I want to talk with you about today, is that if we don't self-correct, if we don't really think differently, if we don't put massive investments in public education to support teachers, we will lose a generation of educators who are making a huge impact. And we cannot afford to do that at a time when gaps are already widening in our country and in our most vulnerable schools and communities. So how are the teachers doing? And I frame this conversation around thinking about this concept here that I oftentimes talk to teachers about, around understanding the effects of secondary traumatic stress. And as I've done this work for several years, I've learned more about the work around secondary traumatic stress that shows that we must begin to understand secondary traumatic stress, much like vicarious trauma, says that those individuals who are going through firsthand stress, the greater proximity that they have to other individuals, that they can also begin to take on the effects of that stress, oftentimes without even knowing it. And so part of what we have to recognize in this moment, there are more educators who are finding themselves in direct connection and direct interaction with young people who are experiencing high levels of stress, trauma, depression, anxiety, and deep-seated sadness. And if we're not asking the question about how teachers are doing in light of that, I think we're going to be missing out on a huge, huge, huge concern that is kind of sort of brewing right here in our midst. So when you think about this traumatic stress, I asked you to think about some of the data that we're now seeing. And the NEA put out a report just a few months ago that talked to over 3,600 educators to ask how are they doing in this current moment. And again, not that these data are surprising or startling, but it gives some real empirical data to what many of us have seen and heard anecdotally. When asking questions about the seriousness of different challenges that students were facing, NEA's research found that 90% of teachers expressed burnout. 2/3 of those who were respondents said that they would classify burnout as a very serious reality. So when 2/3 of your population begin to see burnout as a very serious challenge, that should get our attention, that something deeper is happening here. Same thing when it comes to general stress that's tied to the coronavirus pandemic. Again, close to 2/3 of teachers say this is a very serious issue. Part of what we're also learning is that teachers are reporting that one of the challenges that they have is that students and chronic absenteeism is a much larger issue than we have thought. And so when you have chronic absenteeism, when students do show up, trying to help students get sort of reacclimated, reacquainted, make up for missed time is a huge stressor and a huge burden for many teachers. And that's why this issue around student absences is something that we should pay particular attention to. Then about half said what was also a serious issue, and we are seeing this in schools across the state of California in particular, unfilled job openings. I mean, I cannot tell you how many superintendents I've spoken to. I was speaking to a superintendent just last night who said that they are just really kind of at a loss to figure out how to fill so many positions that are unfilled. Even finding substitute teachers has become more of a challenge. Seeing students who are already in high need schools being in situations where they're with unqualified teachers by way of substitute teachers, or the splitting of classrooms where you're seeing class sizes temporarily being significantly larger than they should be, all because of the fact that we're having a difficult time finding qualified credentialed teachers to be in classrooms. And so you see these issues becoming more and more prevalent. Behavioral issues are becoming more and more of a challenge. But so by and large, what we saw from the study from the NEA is that over half of the members said they're likely to leave or retire from education sooner than planned because of the pandemic. That is our alarm. That is our sounding of deep-seated worry where I sit and many of you sit. The fact that we see half of folks who are contemplating leaving the profession should give us deep-seated worry, because if that does come to fruition, it affects our students across the board. However, where we see the likelihood of those teachers expressing a potential exodus from the profession is more likely to be in those communities that have high numbers of students of color, high number of students who are low-income students, high numbers of students who also are language learners. So the students who are already on the academic fringes may see even greater challenges before them if those schools see a loss of teachers. And what this data found from NEA is that Black and Latinx teachers were more likely to express thoughts about leaving the profession, where it's 62% for Black teachers and almost 60% for Latinx teachers. So again, at a time when we're talking about diversifying the teaching profession, trying to retain teachers of color, these data are deeply troubling given the fact that the effects of the pandemic are so deeply felt. And let's be frank, folks, they may be with us for some time. And so you take a deeper dive into this data, what we also are learning is that when it comes to teacher satisfaction, this is an issue that was already a problem before the pandemic. And if you look at the data that tells us that, even before the pandemic, teachers were concerned about their well-being, but that number has obviously gone up since the pandemic. We saw that there was a study put out by the U.S. Department of Education, National Center for Education Statistics, NCES, which found about 17% of new teachers leave their jobs in the first 5 years of teaching. That number is about 50% for teachers in urban schools who leave within the first 5 years. That data also showed there are about 8% of teachers who leave during the first year. And in the last year, that number has doubled. So now we see about 16% of brand new teachers. I need you to understand this, folks. About 16% of teachers leave during the first year. This has huge implications for us from a teacher education standpoint, because we have to ask, are we adequately preparing our teacher candidates for the realities of what they're walking into? Because many who are leaving the profession in the first year now saying that their student teaching, their teacher preparation did not quite adequately give them what they thought they needed in order to do this job well. So again, part of what we see is that issues around teacher quality of work life survey that, again, close to 2/3 say that they often or always feel stress at work, on par with that with physicians and nurses. So we raise these data because part of what we have to think about, what is the work that we are preparing our students to enter if we're in the teacher education profession? I think we have to be honest and straightforward with our teacher candidates or our prospective teacher candidates about the challenges and demands. And part of the concern is that our inputs and outputs are not really aligning, meaning that we are seeing an exodus of folks that is greater than the entry of folks into the profession. We see that in a number of teacher education programs across the state. Fewer and fewer people are entering the profession. Fewer folks of color are entering the profession. And so what we're going to see potentially is a deep-seated sort of gap in terms of not having enough qualified and credentialed teachers in our schools across the state, but with a particular focus on those areas that have greater needs. And I want to keep coming back to that, our urban and rural communities where we know the needs are already deeper, having a difficult time filling those jobs that you saw in the previous survey. So again, what's causing the burnout? I mean, you don't have to really guess here. We know the autonomy, lack of resources, feeling overworked. The issue of compensation is an interesting one, because that is typically not among the leading factors of why teachers feel burnout or why teachers leave the profession. Most educators say, I don't enter this profession because of the money, but I think that might be changing now, given all that we are asking teachers to do, that more folks are saying, if you're gonna ask me to work, extended hours, do additional duties, have additional responsibilities, that I should be compensated in ways that I'm not. right? So part of what we're also seeing is classroom management difficulties. Again, that's tied to in many ways some of the mental health issues that I think students are going to. Workplace relationships, because again, you've got people who are stressed out, who are dealing with lots of trauma on their own, interacting with other adults who are dealing with their own trauma of their own, and you bring that together, it's oftentimes a recipe for real deep-seated clashes just amongst the adults, let alone anything between the students. And students' well-being not being what it should be. So again, I think it's important to continue to do more data around, collect more data around what's causing teacher burnout. So as we take a deeper dive, now we see some of the data that's reporting out in terms of teachers talking about their concerns during COVID. This Titan Partners report that I think was a phenomenal report that looked at the fact that the number of teachers who have left the profession voluntarily did so primarily because of the pandemic. I will keep coming back to that because we cannot say that we're out of the worst part of the pandemic and not understand the full toll, the full ramifications of how the effects can last for years on our profession. And again, primary concern and focus is always on students, but we cannot neglect or forget about the needs that teachers have in this moment. And because what we're hearing from the data now, it's unfavorable conditions, high levels of stress. The same report that said that if you looked at teachers even thinking about their own well-being, just a couple of years ago, prior to COVID, only about a small number, about 10% of teachers said my well-being was a priority. That number is now triple, where I think teachers, to their credit, are beginning to recognize that I need to prioritize my health and well-being. And again, that goes to this conversation about how we start talking about mental health, how we talk about well-being, and what can schools do? What can districts and counties do to build in a sustained way, more wellness and more health affirming kinds of structures and conditions to support our teachers. Now, as we look at this, it also sort of, again, and I hate to paint such a grim light on this topic, but I think the grimness hopefully serves as a wake-up call. There was a study that Ed Week just reported in terms of the number of teachers who say that they are very satisfied with their jobs. And the number, the percentage of teachers that are very satisfied with their jobs was basically at a 40-year low, where only 12% of teachers reported that they're very satisfied with their jobs. Folks, again, I'm trying to sound the alarm. I'm trying to say, let's listen to what teachers are saying, because right now, this is such an important profession, but the people who commit themselves to this work are not happy, they're not fulfilled, they're not satisfied, they feel overworked, they feel overwhelmed, they oftentimes feel unsupported. And so that's why we have to begin to radically reimagine how we begin to imagine what it is that we ask of our educators. And part of what is concerning to me as we talk about SEL for students, how we need to have a similar conversation for educators. But recently, much to my dismay, we are seeing attacks not just on critical race theory, now we're seeing attacks on SEL. And I just find this to be deeply, deeply troubling, because at a time when we should be leaning into the realities around social emotional learning for our young people, wellness, for our young people and the adults, now social emotional learning has become a part of the cultural wars in our country. You see in the Midwest, there's sort of movements that we should not be talking to students about how they're feeling or their emotions. In Virginia, there's been a big push to demand that schools begin to review and remove aspects of their social emotional learning curriculum, thinking that schools are somehow hiding something from parents. In a number of southern states, they're sort of mandating that teachers not talk about SEL as part of their curriculum. And we're seeing more and more proposed legislation and even approved legislation that's saying that teachers should not be talking to students about feelings without parent consent. So again, part of my worry is that at a time when people are trying to make sense out of the sort of the moment that is COVID, the social emotional ramifications, that we have a movement now that's saying, let's not talk about this. That is just, to me, not ideal in this current moment. So we have to begin to sort of think about our political agency in this moment as well, to let our educators know that in this state, we think that engaging and embracing and talking about social emotional learning is not a detriment to our students and our teachers. It's just the opposite. It's a benefit. It has value when done right that can help sustain people during these trying times. So what else must we understand? Again, I think we've got to engage in more data and understand the research around this. There's another study that we've looked at done by the Clayton Christensen Institute, which I think is really important because they've been sort of really tracking teacher sort of beliefs and thoughts and attitudes around wellness in the past 2 years. One of the things that their data showed is that, again, in the midst of all these challenges, to their credit, teachers are working more hours. And so this is where, again, dilemma of teachers who are already at their wits' end, already feeling like their cups are empty, but the number of teachers who say that they regularly work more than 60 hours a week, the number who say they do 80 to 100 hours a week is not a sustainable model. It's just not. And so we have to begin to ask ourselves, and this is also a leadership question. I talked to a school board member from a district yesterday, and I asked him very bluntly, I said, what are you doing from a district standpoint to begin to put supports in place for teachers? And his response wasn't, to me, very satisfactory. He said, well, look, our teachers have phenomenal benefits, and we encourage them to use their benefits to get whatever help they need to support them in terms of their mental health. And I said, well, so again, that's kind of putting the labor on teachers to say that you have a wonderful benefits package that they've negotiated. And he missed the point. I said, well, I'm talking about what are we doing from a structural standpoint in schools? What are we doing from a structural standpoint in districts that begins to sort of lighten the load of teachers? And so he said, well, these are collectively bargained issues. And I think even some of our leadership seems to be a little bit tone deaf on how we think about these supports. When you have teachers who are working more hours, who have high levels of stress, who know that their workload is not sustainable, it's like seeing a crash that's about to happen, and it's happening in slow motion, and we're not sounding the alarm loud enough to prevent that crash from occurring. And part of what, again, the report that came out from the Clayton Institute highlighted, again, student absenteeism, student social emotional challenges as their biggest challenges in terms of what they're doing this year, right? Have these always been issues for educators? Absolutely, they have. But they've gotten progressively more challenging when you look at teachers who are trying to hold students accountable for completing schoolwork, grading and feedback, lack of support from the administration, this issue around difficulty collaborating with colleagues. Again, I can't let that issue sort of be lost because, again, you all know the saying, how it goes, what hurt people, hurt people. And I'm hearing more clashes, more tension that exists among staff than I've heard in a long time. Has that always been an issue? Yes, but at these levels, perhaps not. And so part of what we have to recognize that the more data we can begin to collect, I think we have to sort of put this on the plates of our elected school board officials, school board members. We have to make this sort of ingrained in the framework of what our superintendents and school leaders are understanding, because these issues are mounting with each passing day. When we see some of the data that talked about sort of, which of the following resources would be most valuable in addressing the challenges, here we see what teachers are asking for. We need more people, more full-time staff. We need more counselors. We need more paraprofessionals. Because again, what we're seeing is that we're asking the teachers of schools across this state and across this country to do the work of 4, 5, 6 people all at the same time. I need you to meet content standards. I need you to also make phone calls to ask why certain students have not showed up. I need you to also serve the role as a quasi social worker, quasi therapist. I need you also to make sure that you are being trauma informed in how you're engaging with students and caregivers and parents. I also need you to make sure you're giving certain students individual time, and the list goes on. Again, these are not responsibilities that are new to teachers, but when you begin to look at the levels of which the needs are, they're increasingly intense. And we're seeing more teachers who are saying that, I'm at or near my breaking point, okay? And again, part of what I think we have to start asking teachers about is that because the levels of stress have been so high, because the levels of responsibilities that we ask of teachers have been so sort of baked into what we define as the normal job, we have large numbers of educators who are burned out, but don't recognize that they're burned out, right? And so part of what we're starting to see is some data that's beginning to ask teachers, which of these sort of characteristics kind of sort of fit how you feel in this current moment. And what we are seeing is that when teachers talk about forgetfulness, difficulty finishing tasks, lack of concentration, lack of energy or passion, emotional irritability, hopelessness, and persistent fatigue, these are signs that teachers have become somewhat normalized to say, this is just what the job requires. And we don't want to get to that point in our profession where teachers begin to accept and normalize these kinds of conditions. It's not a recipe for success. It's not a recipe for long-term thriving in the field. And I think when you see beginning teachers see these kinds of data, it scares the living daylights out of them. When you were trying to talk to young people, and I just had a conversation last week as I talked to a group of students, pre-education majors, about pursuing the teaching profession. And one of the first questions I got from a young person who was at that event is that, what about all the stresses that we hear about why teachers are leaving the profession? Why should we pursue it in light of that? And I thought it was a profound question, a great question, an important question that we have to be upfront about, because at the end of the day, if we are painting this profession in a way that doesn't speak to the realities, I think number one, it's disingenuous. But I think we just have to begin to arm and equip teachers or teachers in training or aspiring teachers with the real set of factors that they are having to have if they're going to enter into the field. But we have to put more pressure on the structures and systems that serve schools to say, why are we consistently putting the responsibilities on educators and not focusing on the change that needs to happen in systems? That's why I've been folks who have heard me talk about this topic, I have kind of taken a one-man approach to say, let's stop saying that teacher self-care is what needs to happen. Teachers practice self-care. Teachers practice self-care. Let's stop saying that, because the teacher self-care movement still puts the responsibility on teachers. To me, why don't we start putting the pressure on the folks who create the structures and systems that require teachers to have so much self-care in the first place? That's where our focus needs to be. What are the structures and systems that require teachers to have so much self-care? So let me talk about what some of those can be. Then I want to open up for questions and answers. So what do we need, right? I think what we need is a real deep-seated look at more structural and systemic support for teachers. What does that look like? It means more people. It means incentivizing. I mean, we've got the state of California, we've had a $139 billion investment in education over the past year tied to the American Rescue Plan. I think we have to start asking some hard questions about accountability. Where have those funds gone? How have they been distributed? Where has the support been for teachers, where we're bringing more teachers, more paraprofessionals, so we're reducing class sizes, we're giving students who have special needs more individualized attention and supports. We have to ask, what are the structural systemic supports for teachers? What do they look like? And again, it can look a multitude of ways. It can be baked in giving teachers more time. It can be baked in sort of the responsibilities we're asking of teachers, and the list can go on. And that list that can go on includes reimagining teachers' workloads, duties, and responsibilities. I think we have to begin to really, I know these are collectively bargained issues that will be looked at again as districts begin to sort of have conversations about their teacher workloads. We're going to have to really rethink what we ask of teachers. Many districts across the state of California had lots of work stoppages prior to COVID around more nurses, around more counselors. I think there needs to be a sort of a doubling or tripling down on some of those same positions. Every school should have sort of an influx of additional counselors and nurses. One of the things that we know is a workable model, and we're seeing some data from this. We have a project looking at this here in LA County, are community schools across Los Angeles County. And one of the things we're learning about community schools is that they have doubled down the number of social emotional supports they have in those schools, the number of psychiatric social workers that are in those schools, the number of parent coordinators that are in those schools. They are helping to lighten the load of teachers in a significant way that allow teachers to do teaching, right? I mean, go figure what a radical idea that would be. But that's what we have to do, is what are the models that we know that are working? How do we study them and then bring them to scale through replication? Here's the other thing that we're hearing from teachers across the LA County. We've got to rethink this disconnected and irrelevant professional development. Part of what we're finding out with a small little informal survey that we're doing, teachers are saying that I need more time. You're asking me to do more with less, in terms of resources, and you're also taking up my time? Why do I have to do a 2-hour professional development that has nothing to do with what I'm doing in my classroom, when that could be time for planning, that could be time for grading, that could be time for phone calls to caregivers and parents? So we have to rethink the professional development model. I'm not saying to get rid of professional learning, but let's ask teachers, what's the kind of professional development that they find beneficial, that they find useful, and how can we make sure that we're not asking teachers to spend inordinate amounts of time that they don't find very useful for their own professional practice? And did I mention time? I'm going to keep mentioning time because that's a sort of a commodity that continues to come up over and over again. More time we hear from teachers for planning, more time for teachers to collaborate, more time for teachers to share, more time for teachers to just rest. And so I think we have to begin to think about some job sharing sort of models that we see in the state of Ohio, where teachers are saying, you know what, I don't want to leave the profession, but if it doesn't change, I'm going to have to. How do we think about job sharing? I've been a big advocate for saying, why can't we think about sabbaticals for teachers, right? We do it at the higher education level. Why can't teachers have 1-year paid sabbaticals for them to have an opportunity to recharge their batteries and rethink sort of how they do their work? I mean, I think we have to begin to think creatively, and we have to begin to use our most innovative approaches. And I think sabbaticals for teachers, even for a 4-month, if you gave a teacher half the year off, but still at a paid rate, I think that can begin to really help teachers begin to think about how they can re-engage and re-energize. And then I would say, we need to listen to teachers. We need more research that is teacher-centered, teacher-friendly, hearing what are the needs of our educators. We have to stop telling them what they need. We have to stop telling them what we think is best for them. And that's why we're doing some focus groups with a group of educators here in Los Angeles, trying to better understand what they can offer us in terms of what next steps need to look forward in moving forward. Saw this great article just today in Edutopia, which I thought was just a small little act that can go that can be so affirming. What educators appreciate about each other this year. And it was really something that kind of brought me to tears, because what I love about teachers is that nobody knows the work of teachers other than folks who are in it, other teachers. And I think what is so valuable in this moment is when you see teachers finding the space, finding the time, and finding ways to affirm their colleagues and coworkers in this moment. And so this article highlighted with over 20,000 teachers said what they appreciate about their colleagues. And when you read it, you just it warms your heart, because it basically said, I mean, folks talked about how much folks show up for them, how much they lift them up, how much they have their backs, how much they just love on them, how much they just sort of see the dedication and sacrifice. And I just think in this sort of teacher appreciation moment, how do we create a society? How do we create a world? How do we create districts that allow the kind of love and the affirmation that was shared on educators by other educators? How do we expand that out so that caregivers and parents and concerned community members and former students, we all engage in this constant sort of recognition and appreciation of what educators do every single day. So again, I want to say again, thank you for all the educators who do this work. We recognize that, even for those of us who are former classroom teachers like myself, we did not teach in a pandemic. And so in so many ways, we need to listen to you. We need to learn from you. We need to lift up your voices. We need to authenticate your experiences, because I think there's so much we can learn from how you've been able to navigate these last 2 years that will set us on a course forward to do something better by this profession. Or if we don't listen to you, we will look back 5-10 years from now and say we had a missed opportunity when we should have listened to teachers. We needed to listen to teachers and we didn't. And our profession suffered as a result. And when our profession suffers, sadly, our students suffer. So I want to stop there and see if we can open up for some Q&A. I hope I've given you some jewels and some pearls to think about. But let's open up for some Q&A. I would love to hear what you all are thinking.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. Those were definitely some jewels, and I'm seeing in the chat that educators are feeling very affirmed by what you shared, and just asking the question, how are teachers doing? We need to ask that more often and really kind of think about who we're hearing the answers from with regard to that question. So thank you. Should we start with our first question from our audience member, Dorn Zinger? I see here he's written, Dr. Howard, the picture of the current landscape is grim. Have you seen pockets of success and sustainability that have been successful in supporting students and communities? What approaches do they take?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I am grim intentionally because I think the grimness I'm hoping is a wake-up call for us all, right? But that doesn't mean that there aren't some bright spots, and doesn't mean that there aren't some areas there that are working, but they're fleeting bright spots. And the reason why I don't lock in on those as much is because what we tend to do is take these fleeting bright spots and say, see, the profession is fine. See, people are figuring it out. So we don't need to worry about these other structural concerns. But I was with the principal I spent a lot of time in schools. It's been great being back in schools after 2 years of not having the opportunity to be in schools. And what I so appreciate, let me give you one good example, one not good example. The one good example that I saw was this principal of a high school. She really turned herself into, but she was, I think this is kind of sort of core to who she is. She's become a massive cheerleader. I mean, she's in the morning, I watched her in hallways greeting teachers. She put Starbucks gift cards in each of the teachers' boxes. She told me about these handwritten notes that she had given teachers, just saying how much she appreciated them. I watched her have conversations in the morning with her staff, kind of sort of just as folks were coming and going. And I talked to a number of the staff there, and they said they just appreciated the little acts of appreciation that she provided to them. And I think for a number of teachers, that's not going to change the significance of what they face. But I think many teachers want to be seen and want to be recognized for their daily commitments and investments, especially when it comes from a school leader. And so I think so much of what I saw in this particular school is that there were these acts of just kindness and appreciation and recognition that this one principal said. She said, I have to be the person who lifts them up every day. I have to be the person who sort of who affirms them, who lets them know, because if I don't do this, they'll feel like no one sees what they do. And so I think that's a small act. And I think we have to figure out how can we sort of begin to sort of see more acts of that kind of gratitude and generosity being sort of coming from up on high. But I contrast that with another school that I was at with the leadership team that just, and I want to be fair to leaders. I don't want to be, because the same talk I just gave to teachers, a similar talk can be given to school leaders in this moment, right? But I think that with leadership comes responsibility. And the contrast to that was I saw another model where the leader was just tone deaf with her staff. I mean, it was just, I sat in a professional development session that was supposed to be scheduled for 3 hours. And you could tell these folks were just disengaged. And so instead of like saying, look, folks, I'm going to give you a half an hour back, I'm going to give you an hour back, she just plugged through this in such a painstaking way. And and I always ask teachers, how are things going here? And they said, the morale is bad. The heaviness that we feel is just a lot. And so my message to leaders right now, you got to learn how to read the room and read the room with your staff, listen to your teachers. And there are things that you can't do, but there are lots of small things that you can do. So to Doran's point, I think that, I wish there were better models that we saw, but I don't see a lot of them that are systemic and structural. They're more individual acts, but we can't rely on individual acts alone. We need structural acts that help to get us to a better place.
Thank you so much. We have another question here by Kelly Wagstaff. How can we engage and support the people we work with who are not aligned with this type of mindset and work?
Yeah, boy, these are great questions. I think why I share data is because the data helps us to paint a picture. And I think that picture that we are portraying is one that shows that teachers across different school types, district types are really struggling in this moment. And so I think we have to sort of, pull people in instead of pushing people out. And yes, there are going to be people who don't have the kind of mindset around this work. But I think we have to ask ourselves this fundamental question, who we ask teachers to care for kids every single day, to give their best for kids, but who cares for the caregivers? I would say who does the supporting for those who provide the support? Who does the nurturing for those folks who do the nurturing? And so I think we have to bring it back to our students, but ask who are the adults who spend more time throughout the course of a day with young people sometimes than their own parents and caregivers do. So I think we have to try to bring folks along and not engage in combative sort of finger pointing, but try to help them to understand the story and hear the voices and hear the day-to-day realities of what teachers are going through. And you hope through awareness comes a better understanding, and with understanding comes empathy, and with empathy comes action. So that's my hope. And some might say that's a little hokey-ish, but I think for those who are not on board, I just don't think they know what they think they know.
I think that's such an important question, is who's caring for the caregivers. And it's such a big question and something that we can't tackle immediately. And I have a few other questions here about these big challenges. So someone is asking, how can we realistically change this pattern of burnout? And how do we fund this extra support? Someone else, Shannon, asked, how do we fund this extra support that is so very needed? So how do we go about making these structural changes that you're suggesting?
Yeah, no, I think it starts by calling out the need for structural change as opposed to focusing on what individual teachers can do. And I think that there are folks who do the work around individual ways to support teachers, but I think we need to start looking at models that work, right? And so I mentioned what I saw in the state of Ohio, where in a district outside of Cleveland, what teachers and parents started doing was working together in a way that look, parents want to be more involved in this moment. Okay, if they want involvement, hey, let's get them involved, right? Part of what we know is that what helps teachers, for example, structurally, is smaller class sizes, right? Now, and what we also see in a number of highly effective schools, the adult to student ratio is smaller, right? So how do we get more adults in schools? How do we get more adults in classrooms, right? And that doesn't mean that folks have to be credentialed teachers, but those districts that have more paraprofessionals tend to have more supports for teachers, right? I think we also have to ask school boards to say, where are funds being allocated that were supposedly to be put in place for sort of COVID recovery, right? I think that some of this is about investments. And not just one-time investments, but how do we begin to put pressure on our elected officials to say, we want these to be permanent investments. We need to have, schools that have not just one social worker, but how do we ensure that schools that have high needs have a team of social workers, right? That would be huge for teachers who say that there is a therapist or a counselor or a behavioral specialist who we don't have to share with 5 other schools, but it's designated only to our school, right? So the structural changes are, do we have highly trained professionals and individuals who are staples in our schools, right? I see affluent schools across this country who it's very common for them to have a team of counselors, where there's a ratio of 30, 40 students to one counselor. We see in California, our ratio is something like 960 students to one counselor. We're completely out of compliance here in ways that are just not sustainable. So we need to do a better job of looking at investments, long-term supports. And I think another piece in this is I think we've got to do a better job engaging the philanthropic community into this work. We live in the state of California where there is tremendous amount of wealth that's in this state. We've got to begin to think about, and strategically engage the philanthropic community to say, look, your investment here can go a long way, but to be able to identify how those investments will lead to positive outcomes. So I think we've got to begin to sort of lift up the profession, listen to the kind of experiences that our educators are going through, but then also sort of match it with our resources in an ongoing and sustainable way.
You are inspiring us to want to make great things happen, Tyrone. I really appreciate your thoughts here. We've got some new teachers who are listening in, and I think some, these folks are in either their teacher credential program, new teachers, and they're wondering if you have some advice that you can give them, particularly new teachers who are deeply committed to equity and justice. What are some actions that they can start taking early in their careers? And in particular, how would you think about any advice that you have for aspiring and new educators of color?
Yes, yes. So first and foremost, I would start responding to all those new educators by saying thank you. Thank you for choosing to serve in this time of need. And I think we just need to say that. You've chosen, I think, the most important profession on the planet. I know I'm biased, but I'm going to say it's the most important profession on the planet. And thank you for stepping up at a time of deep-seated need, as I mentioned. But I think in terms of actionable steps, number one, I'm just in the business now of telling folks, know that it's difficult. It's always been difficult, but it's more difficult than ever. Know you're going to have your days where you doubt yourself. That's natural. Know that there are going to be days when you cry, because all of us cried as first-year teachers. It's okay to cry. Crying is therapeutic. So let the tears flow on the days when you have to cry. Find mentorship. Find people who have been in this work for a while and stay connected to them. Ask people formally, will you be my mentor? I need a mentor. Or sometimes you have to tell them, I look up to you so much, you are my mentor. But you have to recognize that no one does this work alone. Find mentors. Stay connected to people who you may have been in your teacher education program with, because sometimes that's a big community to stay connected to. Find communities that you can learn and grow from, because those communities will sustain you. And I also maintain that for me, the biggest jump for me as an educator happened between years 1 and 2, because I learned and I read a lot, and I wanted to just expand my own horizons on what it meant to teach. And so continue to grow in ways that you can, if you will. And for those teachers of color, I really want to say something very special for you, because part of what I don't want you to do, and this is, there's been a big focus on how we increase and recruit more teachers of color, and I get that, but I'm equally concerned about the retention of teachers of color. And I'm concerned about that because what happens is that teachers of color oftentimes have to pay what I call the folks of color tax. They're asked to do far more than what their white counterparts are asked to do at times. Meaning that if you're one of the few teachers who speaks a particular language, you're oftentimes asked to serve as the translator for students and families. If you are the lone person who knows how to connect with students who have behavioral challenges, you're asked to be that person to kind of help mediate issues. If they're unruly students, they show up in your classroom. The list goes on. So I'm going to ask those teachers of color to understand that it's okay to say no to some things, to tell those folks of color to know that you matter in more ways than you recognize, because it's important not just for students of color to see you, but for white students to see you as well. And that representation matters. And when you have students of color in particular who see someone who looks like them, who speaks a language that they speak, who has a background similar to theirs, that you are making a huge impact in ways that you cannot even begin to quantify. So just know that it's difficult, but you're in an important profession where you can make a profound impact every single day in this profession. But find mentors, find supports, find people who can connect to you to let you know how they navigate these difficult challenges, because you will have them, they will happen. Don't beat yourself up. Learn how to turn those laptops off at a certain hour, get plenty of rest, stay hydrated, do what you have to do. It's what, Stephen Covey in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People says, sharpen your saw.
Thank you, Tyrone. And I just want to share with the audience, one of the areas that the Teacher Academy is hoping to move in is to create a space for teaching fellows to support our beginning teachers through those first 5 years in a lot of the ways that you just described. So stay tuned for emails to follow on that. I want to end with one last question. I'm trying to think about how to wrap all of a bunch of questions into one. But we had a lot of questions about, and you touched on this at the beginning, about sort of this negativity that comes around conversations related to critical race theory and how that's been taken up and brought into schools, and social and emotional wellness, and conversations about LGBTQ students. And I think this raises a broader question about how does intentional wellness for students or for staff and teachers and students, how does that provide equitable outcomes for all students? And how do they navigate these sort of negative talk that's around so that they can stay in points of wellness for their own well-being and for students' well-being?
Yeah, no, great question, Beth. I think that, I tell my teacher ed students on the first day of class that you have to understand in the words of Paulo Freire, teaching is a political act. There's no neutrality in this. Choosing to teach is political. Where you choose to teach is political. How you choose to teach is political. What you choose to teach is political. So I think you have to understand that you enter this in a sort of a context, and that context, whether we like it or not, is highly politicized in ways that, you know, we can't always imagine. And that political sort of context is even heightened now. And so I think that what that means is you have to recognize that there are agendas out there, that there's a weaponization of things that should be just sort of part and parcel of what we do as educators that are going to be used against teachers. There are people who are going to come after you to say that you don't do your job well, despite the fact that they've never done your job. That there are going to be people who think that you know, you're doing things to students that you're not doing to students. And so you just have to understand the political moment that you're doing this work in. And I think this is where you have to form alliances. It's where you have to form that community. I keep mentioning that community because what will happen is that you will start to question yourself. You'll start to challenge your own sort of ways of doing this work. And that is healthy on the one hand to be reflective, but sometimes if it goes too far, you can start to really undermine your own brilliance. You start to undermine your own competency, your own capacity. And that's what we don't want you to do. You have to have a clear sort of intentionality about why you chose to do this work. You have to have a clear intentionality about knowing that you do this because equity is a focus, and that you do this work because you want to help create schools that serve all students. Let me be clear. But you also have an intentional focus on those who have historically been marginalized. We know who they are. Kids who come from low-income backgrounds, students of color, you know, our LGBTQ plus students, our immigrant students, students with disability. We know who those students are who have historically been marginalized and continue to be marginalized. And you always have a focus and intentionality on those folks as well. But you also have to recognize that you're not in this alone, that there are lots of other like-minded folks who are fighting the fight and who've been fighting this fight for a long time. And you need to lean on them, and you need to listen to them, and you need to learn from them. And I will also say that some of the biggest allies and co-conspirators might be the folks that you least suspect. Right. So I tell like some of my candidates of color that sometimes they think, well, you know, this older white guy, he can't, you'd be surprised. That sometimes that might be the guy who is the person you connect with. So let's not play identity politics. Let's listen and learn. And I always say this, here's one of my litmus tests. Now I'll close out on this one. I always ask students can tell you the teachers who have their best interests at heart. Ask the students, who are the teachers who you know who care about you the most? And those are the folks you need to find and ask them what they do, or just watch them, observe them, listen to them, because students will be straight shooters, and students know who are the teachers who are really going to hold them accountable, but yet still believe in them and support them, who engage in what Judith Kleinfeld calls being warm demanders, right? Those educators who hold students to high expectations, hold them to rigorous standards, but do so with warmth and love and care. And that's what we're talking about here, right? Not teachers who are willing to just write students off and feel sorry for them because they're going through difficult times, and not teachers who are tone deaf and who don't support students holistically. It's the teachers who bring both of those realities together of the warm demanding that we have to begin to sort of lift up. And those are the educators we have to learn from. But if we're not careful, we're going to burn those folks out because many of them are already burned out because they're doing so much. So I know I sound like a broken record on this, but I just think that we've got to find a way to help fortify those beginning teachers because they are our reinforcements. And so I love what you just said, Beth, about having those kind of, you know, support groups of those first 5-year folks, because we have to make sure we're consistently helping to give them the support that they need, or we're going to miss out in a big, big way of keeping this pipeline moving.
Thank you so much, Tyrone. Your words have inspired us to do well by our teachers, and we have a community here committed to that cause. So thank you for being a part of it. We are very grateful.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tyrone. I echo all of the sentiments and just really appreciate you taking time to share all of this really important research and affirm what we all know and see, so we can really make the change and come together as a community. So thank you for being part of our community today. And for all of you who participated in the chat and the questions and sending questions early on, it really is exciting to see how we can all come together to really kind of put teachers at the center, because we know that they're they're the carers and nurturers of students and student learning. So thank you, Tyrone.
Mhm.
All right, I get to shift gears, and I am really pleased to share this space with the many UCI alumni who are here and part of this network. And I also have the pleasure of introducing the president of the UCI Anteaters in Education Alumni Chapter Board, Dr. Frank Olmos, who will present their Outstanding Alumni Teacher Award.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Hello. Well, the Anteaters in Education Outstanding Alumni Teacher Award was created to recognize a UCI alumnus for their stellar work in the field of education. This year, we received 15 nominations for alumni, from alumni who are doing tremendous work in the field. The Alumni Chapter Board voted for a winner based on the following criteria: positive impact on students, overcoming challenges, and commitment to the field. All of our nominees exhibited these attributes, but the voting brought us to 3 finalists. We would like to first recognize 2 alumni runners-up with an honorable mention. Lonnie Matsumura, founding 2nd grade teacher at Agnew Elementary School in Santa Clara Unified School District. And Chamara Nguyen, Assistant Director of TK26 at Vibrant Minds Charter School as well. Thank you both for your tremendous work in the field and for being outstanding UCI alumni educators. And now the winner of the Anteaters in Education Outstanding Alumni Award for 2022 is, let's see, envelope please. Dr. Catherine Ye, Assistant Professor at Chapman University. Congratulations. Let me give you some background on Dr. Catherine Ye. She's emblematic of the type of change agent the UCI School of Education aims to put out in the world. Dr. Ye has a strong record of publications, many of which include her teacher credential students as co-authors and a best-selling NCTM book. Dr. Ye's work explores the intersections among mathematics, neurodiversity, and culture, and seeks to provoke discussion of how to create spaces that are more cognitively and emotionally safe for all learners. Dr. Ye was recently awarded the AMTE Early Career Award and the Scudder Award for Faculty Excellence at Chapman University. She is frequently cited as the reason many of our multiple subject teacher candidates decide they love mathematics. She created and manages the Community Math Project that pairs teacher credential students with students and families in a local school district. Outside of mathematics, Dr. Ye has been instrumental in establishing both an ethnic studies major and Asian studies minor at Chapman University. She was also involved in several local community efforts involving teachers, students, and families to add an ethnic studies course to district's courses of study. These efforts came at a personal cost to her and her family as she became a target of hate groups across the nation. Prior to pursuing her doctorate at UCI, Dr. Ye was a math teacher for over a decade in LAUSD. She remains in contact with many of her former elementary school students. All of these accomplishments distinguish Dr. Catherine, but it's also worth noting that her family immigrated to the United States while she was still in grade school. Her experiences as a student who had to quickly accommodate to a new home, a new culture, and a new language while learning the prescribed classroom curriculum informs her work today. Dr. Ye is an amazing scholar, activist, mother, colleague, and human. I present to you Dr. Catherine Ye.
I'll be honest, I'm a little speechless. I was asked to first of all, thank you so much. It is the deepest honor. I know actually one of the 3 finalists, Chamara, is a teacher that I work very closely with. So I'm humbled to be with the 3 finalists, all women of color, thinking about the work that they do. I was asked to talk a little bit about my time at UC Irvine and how it has stayed with me. I also think deeply about Dr. Tyrone Howard's talk and about the importance of how we in education can sustain and survive at a time where there's so many suffering. While I was at UC Irvine, I think a really important lesson for me was this idea of that Dr. Tyrone Howard had said about the importance of us being in a community to learn and grow from. As I was there at UC Irvine and starting in my year 2010, I was a part of many credential program courses and also study groups where we created this collective community of university researchers and professors like Dr. Van Ness, who's on right now, to course instructors, to students like teacher candidates, to myself who's learning along the way. And this idea that we come together to learn and have a shared vision to think about what we can do to create a better space. I think a lot about what Dr. Tyrone Howard has said, that we cannot ask teachers to take on any more by themselves. And when I really think about what I've learned from UC Irvine, is this idea that change takes a collective. The person who nominated me, Dr. Tara Barnhart, was also a UCI graduate. She's my colleague here at Chapman. Hearing what she wrote touches my heart because to me, I think she deserves the award in the sense of having someone who would sit there and spend hours writing, applying for you and nominating you. It shows what UCI has given me and Dr. Barnhart. That for us to survive as educators, for us to survive in the communities that we're at, we have to do things together. Change takes a collective. Structural change takes a collective. We have to build across coalitions, and we need to work with others. And since my time at UC Irvine, I have been actively involved in not just what happens in the classrooms, we need to be outside the classrooms. Are we at board meetings? Are you at your school board meeting? Because those are sites and spaces where they're making decisions that will impact you and the students. So I've learned that we cannot look just within the classroom. We have to look beyond that system to realize that education is political and that we are, as teachers, we need to organize. We need to organize, we need to build coalitions, and we need to build a movement with others with a shared vision that that we can only survive and thrive when we care for each other. So thank you so much for this award. For me, I think this is, I dedicated, and I think it's really to the person who nominated me, which is Dr. Tara Barnhart. She deserves it, to be honest with you. But it just speaks to what UC Irvine has given me. This deep friendship and the sense of community to allow me to grow and thrive. So thank you.
Congratulations, Dr. Ye, and thank you for sharing that inspirational message with us. And thank you, Frank, for really bringing to light all of the amazing teachers that were nominated, and congratulations to each of the Outstanding Alumni Teacher Award nominees. We are so honored to have you be part of our network. So I have the very fun and final responsibility of announcing today's raffle winners. Each of the raffle winners will be contacted after this event and will receive Dr. Howard's book, All Students Must Thrive. And I'm really excited because we get to continue the conversation through our upcoming book club, and I invite each of you to participate and attend. But in particular, we're going to have our raffle winners have the book, and here they are. I'm going to announce the top 10. Number 1, Amber Lee. Number 2, Michael Stern. Number 3, Nick Navarro. Number 4, Rina Rana. Number 5, Dwayne Tran. Number 6, Reina Gonzalez Jimenez. 7, Liz Ramos. 8, Judy Conroy. 9, Fatima Alcam. And 10, Raul Sedas. Congratulations to each of you. I'm so pleased to see familiar and new names on that list and really excited to keep the conversation going with you all. Thank you to each of you educators who participated in our event today. We are so appreciative that we could have you in conversation with us, and in particular to Dr. Howard for sharing his expertise and inspiration with us as learners. And I believe I have one more final thank you, and that is to our sponsors, in particular, Schools First Credit Union and Orange County Department of Education, who provided us with support for this event, including the Anteaters in Education Alumni Chapter, Tilly's Life Center, Teacher Creative Materials, Bear Coast Coffee, Lakeshore Learning, and Aquarium of the Pacific. And most importantly, thank you, educators who joined us today. I agree. I think you should be honored and affirmed every day of the year, and look forward to hearing from you and connecting with you at future events, and also just, one-on-one through email. So I invite you to continue the conversation, but for today, thank you for participating, and thank you to Dr. Howard.